Here's the ABC showing us a Bureau of Meteorology weather map with a big hotspot. Remember where that is. Telling us that Will Stephan and his Climate Council of Australia, independently funded they point out, have figured out that a record heat wave would be virtually impossible without climate change. That's very clever. It shows signs of intelligence. It possibly wouldn't dawn on everybody that not every year is exactly the same. So the 1877 drought would also be virtually impossible without climate change. Who knows what caused it? This is about heat waves, and if you want to know more about heat waves in Australia, I suggest you search Jeff with a G Sherrington. I'll be talking about the maps. Apparently this photo has something to do with 123 temperature records being broken. Well, with all of the different places that temperatures are recorded across Australia at various times of the day, etc., 123 is a pretty small amount. You would expect that if we're going through serious climate change, there'd be a lot more than that. What I'm more interested in is the accuracy of these maps. And I set the camera in front so you can see it as well. To get to the maps, we can click down here on Climate Data Online from the Bureau's homepage there. Click on the maps of recent conditions here, and here we've got lots of choices. We'll click on the temperature, and this is showing us recent conditions, mean, maximum. We can select a whole lot of different things here. There's the highest maximum. We can look at a week or a day or a month. But if we want to go back in time, we have to click on the archive. Now let's go back and have a look at 1925. We'll start looking at November in 1925. Highest maximum temperature. This is the hottest it got in that month. It's between 30 and 33 degrees C. Now let's look at the mean maximum temperature for that month, and we find the ridiculous situation. These jokers must be laughing that people swallow this rubbish. 39 to 36 degrees C. So the mean, they're telling us, is higher than the highest. Absolutely ridiculous. They must be laughing their guts out at the fact that people swallow this crap. Let's have another look around. This is the maximum anomaly. This area here is more than 6 degrees C hotter on average for that month compared to the long-term average. Well, so they say, but if you look at the daily maps, this line here is that point there, 0 degrees C, and that is that spot. So the 12th was not that hot. But let's check every day, because to get that +6, it only takes one really hot day, but it would have to be incredibly hot to shift the average up that high. We'll just click on later here, go through the days, and we quickly see that that 0 line is there on that spot nearly every one of these days. The daily maps just don't add up to the total we see on the monthly maps. This is not real data, it's faked. Here we're getting colder, not hotter. That would leave the remaining few days in the month incredibly hot, but they don't get hot. This time we'll have a look at this area and see that they add up to nearly 5 degrees C, the errors. But before we do, we'll have a look at the About the Map page you can find by clicking on this link. If we go to that one, right up the top here, it says the air temperature analyses and associated maps use data contained in the Bureau of Meteorology Climate Database, the Australian Data Archive for Meteorology, ADAM. It's one of many databases that they have, all with a different version of history. They seem to have ADAM and the one that we can see online, CDO, and another one called Silo, and another one called HQ, and another one called Acorn. They've obviously got endless funds and time to spend on recreating different versions of history. I'd like it if they digitised the old data and actually kept the original records. We'll continue reading here. The analysis are initially produced automatically from real-time data with limited quality control. That's obviously talking about what happens now, currently, but what happened in the past, still a mystery. They are intended to provide a general overview of air temperatures across Australia as quickly as possible after the observations are received. We're concerned with 1925, and I think they've had enough time to sort that. Let's have a look at the QA. The analysis used data collected through electronic and paper communications channels. These data have been screened for errors. Using an automated technique, right, and make use of quality control which has been undertaken on the climate database. We would assume that means the ADAM climate or ADAM climate database. Full quality and control is completed some weeks to some months after the end of the most recent month when extreme values are confirmed by written reports. We've had a little time after that month. Data more generally are compared with those of nearby stations so that values and dates of occurrences are similar. That means that if your area had a hailstorm but the guys across the road didn't get one, and nor did the island out to sea or the place up in the hills nearby, that your hailstorm will probably be deleted, and they'll check to make sure it was deleted. I'm only guessing. Occasionally in the data sparse areas, observational errors may enter the analyses because they cannot be detected by comparison with other reports. In these instances, the erroneous maps will be amended as soon as practical. Right. Might be practical to do 1925. What do you reckon? It's a data sparse area. Who knows what they would amend it with? That's the trouble. Here, describing how those monthly and daily maps relate to each other, it says monthly maximum and minimum temperatures are calculated as the averages of the corresponding daily maximum or minimum temperature. We've seen that's not true, and we'll see it again today. The anomaly maps show the departure from the long-term climate average calculated over the period 1961 to 1990, with the daily anomalies calculated with respect to the monthly average for the relevant month. So here it says the daily anomalies are calculated with respect to the monthly average for the relevant month. Well, no, they're not. Let's prove that again. Here in this area we need to see a total around 5 degrees C here, and further out around 4 degrees C for these dailies. If we go through the dailies, the first one we see, they reckon it's colder than average here. Who knows how that was figured out? Go back to the beginning, and there we see the zero line right through our area, and as we continue on, that zero line stays there, or we see colder than average spreading across that area. And there is no way that these things are going to add up to that hot. Minor distraction here. I've been commenting about the artists who take time out from all the other important tasks the Bureau of Meteorology seems to perform, like influencing the outcome of cliffhanger elections and Kevin 747ing off to conferences about great moral dilemmas. Let's have a look at this artwork that either a machine or a person has done, specifically that dot in the middle. We can zoom in on Western Australia, and as you would expect by now, everything contradicts everything else. The dot has gone. Oh dear. Back to the Australia map to continue through the days, and obviously the daily data has been fed to the pet, but Hooch might be crying out for food. He doesn't want to eat data. The daily data does not add up to the monthly data, nor is it real, because there's no way that day after day after day in the same place would be just below average. It's minus 5.5 degrees at the ACT airport, according to the Bureau of Meteorology homepage here, where they're advertising German products. They're predicting that it'll get down to minus 3 degrees C while it's minus 5.5. This is the fourth video in a series having a look at their climate data maps, and today we're going to road test a claim here. In the About the Map link we get to a claim. This grid point analysis technique provides an objective average for each grid square and enables useful estimates in data sparse areas such as Central Australia. Well, to find a data sparse area, we need to find a temperature record that doesn't go back to where we know there was a heat wave. Now, using a place I'm familiar with, I'll type in Canberra, and here we see Canberra ACT, and we can have a look at the temperature records around here. Now, the alternative reality that the Bureau of Meteorology people live in, they seem to think Canberra Airport is in New South Wales, they seem to think Tuggeranong is in New South Wales, and Corran Forest, Bendora and Mount Janini, of course they're not in New South Wales. But if we click on one of those, we clearly see the record is very short. So we'll look for a more relevant short record, and we find one at Eucla, where the data has been made sparse. Although data exists, that's daily, we can see some more data from there if we look at monthly. But although data was taken way back through here, it's been used to fertilise the office pet plant, Hooch or something. It's missing from 1920. That enables us to have a look at this heat wave. Now, the state meteorologist for South Australia gave the review of summer for 1920 to 21 to the newspaper, the Adelaide Observer, 16th of April 1921, and at the tail end of his review there we see a heat wave passing through Eucla from the 20th to the 24th with 110 and 114 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. We'll give them a pass mark if they show us a heat wave on their climate map. So we'll look from the 20th of December there, and we'll go through this spot here. There's no heat wave on the 21st, 22nd, 23rd or 24th, so it is not estimating correctly, and that's a fail. Going back to their analysis here, they give us another link. These analyses are computer generated using a sophisticated analysis technique described here. And if we click on that one, up comes a PDF page where they tell us that they're in line with world standards. And in this media release here about some check of their mathematics, they say that they've been reviewed by a panel who found their data and analysis methods met with world's best practice. A commenter, Carbon 500 on the Jonova blog, has checked the numbers from the Met Office of the Central England temperature record and found that they too don't add up. If you add up all the individual numbers, the total that you get doesn't divide down to the same average. The following may contain images and audio of politically incorrect thermometer data. Flickering reality may trigger indoctrinated episodal misanthropics. Okay, in the last video we had a look at the massive damage to a wide area caused by missing data, what they call data sparse area. We saw that the Bureau of Meteorology realised that data sparseness is a problem, and we saw that they used misleading pretty colours to show us something which was unrelated to a heat wave that was completely missing from their maps. Now today we're going to see that, fully aware of the problem that data sparseness can cause, that the Bureau of Meteorology have lost more than one or two measurements from one particular record. They seem to have lost 44 years worth of it. So first, let's get familiar with degrees Fahrenheit. Here on Google, if we type a number in and then degrees F to C, it will convert from Fahrenheit to Celsius. Now this is a ridiculously high number, 128 degrees Fahrenheit converts to 53.3 degrees Celsius. Very, very hot. From the newspapers in 1861, we read about the explorer John McDouall Stewart and his party having quite a hot day there. The storeman of the group writes to his parents, "The thermometer stood yesterday in the shade 128 degrees." And so that we know that wasn't a sun affected temperature, he says, "In the sun 173. This morning at 5 o'clock it was down to 43 degrees. Cold enough to starve a fellow to death. This is the most changeable place I was ever in. It is never 2 hours alike." Now of course we know it wasn't 128 degrees Fahrenheit out there every day. In fact, every day that there was no explorers present, it was just perfectly average. And 53 degrees is 14.5 degrees C hotter than anything recorded on the same day in December last year. Now, that place where that was recorded, it's a bit south of William Creek, and William Creek post office opened in 1896. We can see from the South Australian Register, 15th of October 1896. Strangeway Springs Parcel Post Office closed. Strangeway Springs Telegraph Office opened William Creek. And from one of my favourite books, Meteorological Observations Made at the Adelaide Observatory and Other Places in South Australia and the Northern Territory, 1896, we see the same thing. Station closed in September 1896. Instruments transferred to William Creek, 23 miles north-northwest of Strangeway Springs. Now, from about 1884, led by Clement Raggy in Adelaide, the state meteorologists started installing Stevenson screens and standardising on those, but it's an expensive and difficult thing to go everywhere in the country and do it quickly, so they simply couldn't do it quickly. They did it to places they were going to anyway, or new installations. Well, that's a new installation. Down the bottom here it says, each of these stations, with the exception of Clare, is furnished with a mercurial barometer of either the Fortin Construction or the Board of Trade type. Every station except Fowler's Bay has dry and wet bulb maximum and minimum thermometers mounted on a modified form of the Greenwich stand, similar to that at Adelaide, or a Stevenson screen. So we can be fairly certain that William Creek from September 1896 was Stevenson screen. And later on the 10th of January 1920, the government were confident enough of the data from William Creek to use 2 years of it in court. We can see that from the Daily Herald, Adelaide, 10th of January 1920. 1932, Thursday 18th of February, the papers tell us, Mr. B.W. Newman of Adelaide Weather Bureau left for the interior today. The primary object of his trip is to inspect the new location of meteorological instruments at Alice Springs. He will also examine the instruments at Port Augusta, William Creek and other stations along the route. So we know it was checked again in 1932. You'll see at the bottom of this video in the comments section, if I can fit them in, about 30 other references over the years to William Creek, but the locals got to know that it was a very hot place. There were jokes about it in the newspapers, and it's even mentioned as far up as 25th of October 1940, where they're talking about it being 112 degrees Fahrenheit on the 22nd. So there we have one incredibly long record. And if we go to the very long, hot, old record, if we go to the Bureau of Meteorology page, and we'll get there from the home page. Oh, it's going to be -5 tomorrow. We'll click here on the climate data online. We'll have a look at temperature, and we'll click monthly because they don't always have daily data. We'll type in William Creek and see if it can find it. There it is, and we'll have a look at closed stations, and there isn't one within 150 kilometres of it. Nothing. Oh well. We're not looking at how the Bureau of Meteorology predict the future, we're having a look at how they predict the past. On this map today we're looking at the highest maximum temperature for a month. We're looking at the month of May this year, and have a look just to the left of this nutty doodle drawing and watch how, when we go back through the years, at that point the highest maximum temperature is different every May, as you would expect. No 2 years are the same. And if we go back quite a way where there was genuine data at this point, and go through those years again, you'll see that it's changing quite a lot. So the highest maximum is not the same in different years. And that's how we know that this data was faked in the very early years, because as you would expect with fake data, it's cooler. But not only that, all the years are the same. So this is system generated data. Now at this point you may be thinking where I'm going with this. There's been found right through the Bureau of Meteorology data, worst of course in the acorn where most problems focus, a annual system generated square wave. So you may have been thinking I was leading up to how easy it is to plot a scary looking trend on a perfectly stable natural variation cycle and predict all sorts of doom from it, but that's not where we're going at all. This gets far crazier. If we switch to having a look at the maximum anomaly for a month, we'll see that this May, that area is green, and if we go to a day there, we'll see the opposite. The days are warm, and it doesn't matter what day we pick, they're all the same. If we go through any May day, they're all warm, and if we have a look at any year, they're all the same, warm in that spot. But if we go to another month, then we see a different thing. Doesn't matter what day. And it doesn't matter what year, that area is always the same coloured green. And this repeats in an annual cycle. We see the same crazy month. I'm going to go earlier through the months. You'll see we've got a cold one, then a warm one, then a colder one, then an even colder one, and if we go through any of these months we see the same temperature day after day in that spot. Now this annual square wave repetition of monthly cycles has been found in the ACORN data by a clever fellow, Mr. Bob Fernley-Jones. If you have a look at this extreme cycle here, what he did was subtract the raw CDO, they call it, data from the ACORN data at various different sites and have a look at the difference. And you can see these regular square wave cycles, not like any natural sine wave cycle, through all of the data. It's an infection like a superbug in a hospital. Everything seems to have got it. It just keeps getting worse.
I rise to paint a picture of climate change, a picture where Camden, just to the southwest of Sydney, is sweltering in 50-degree heat. Over in the west it's 51 degrees in the shade at Geraldton. Even Perth is 44, Geelong 43, Wilcannia 48, Carnarvon 49.5, and Southern Cross is 50 degrees. The death rate is 12 in 100,000 from heat-associated deaths. 435 are dead over a summer. This is not a Green Scare campaign, but the Federation drought 118 years ago. It has never been as hot since, but the Bureau of Meteorology claims it's getting hotter and hotter. How could it be getting hotter? And how could last year, 2013, be the hottest on record if it was hotter back in 1896, if it was really hotter 118 years ago? Well, administratively, it's relatively simple. The early years are simply wiped from the official record. Sure, you can find the values I'm quoting at the Bureau's website, but they're not part of the official record, the Australian Climate Observation Reference Network Surface Air Temperatures, or ACORN-SAT. The official temperature record, the record that the Bureau uses to report on climate change issues and temperature trends, only starts in 1910 and only uses data from 112 stations. But it doesn't use the same 112 stations for the entire period. This 28-page document, which is titled ACORN-SAT Station Adjustment Summary, shows that the temperature series for almost every site that makes up the ACORN-SAT network that is used to report on official temperature change in Australia has been homogenised. In plain English, the raw data has been changed so that the past appears cooler relative to the present. The document tells us that statistics have been used to homogenise the record for Wilcannia from 1957, but it doesn't tell us why the Wilcannia record doesn't begin in 1910. It is also unclear why ACORN-SAT only starts in 1910. The Bureau claims that before 1910 there were no Stevenson screens, a structure now considered standard for housing thermometers, as though this is a good reason for excluding earlier records. In reality, many Stevenson screens were installed from 1889. How can the Bureau justify these actions? Consider the accountant joke, Mr Deputy Speaker. 3 applicants for an accounting job were asked the same question: what's 1 + 1? The first 2 applicants say 2, but the third turns around, locks the door, pulls down the blinds, leans in and whispers, "What do you want it to be?" Well, I'll be writing to the Parliamentary Secretary this week to request an inquiry into the conduct of the Bureau of Meteorology and the homogenisation process. We cannot have 2 sets of books at the Bureau and use fudge figures skewed to support a global warming hypothesis as the official records. These fudge figures are being used for media reporting and scientific analysis. We have a scientific process here being tainted right at the source by a government department.
The Australian government has changed, and George talked about how much influence the issue of anthropogenic global warming has had on the leaders of the political parties and who's in power. While the government's changed, the anthropogenic global warming paradigm which dominates has not changed. And from a science perspective, it still defines the research questions asked and the public policy solutions to some extent that are at least put forward to government. And the scientists involved are still up to their old tricks. Remember the ClimateGate emails that Phil Jones trick of beginning with a proxy temperature record and then substituting this with instrumental records when the proxy temperature record started to show decline. What I'm planning to show you this afternoon is how climate scientists at the Australian Bureau of Meteorology outsource the development of warming trends not to Phil Jones but to computer algorithms. And until this trick is more widely understood, it's actually going to be difficult for any Australian government, while the carbon tax may be repealed, it's going to be difficult for them to move beyond anthropogenic global warming as a theory that dominates discussions about climate science. Because, as Richard Lindzen so brilliantly explained in his essay for the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons last year, politicians are obliged to respond to alarm from scientists. So I'm going to talk about one aspect of anthropogenic global warming that Australian politicians like George have to deal with, the temperature record. By way of acknowledgements, I need to say that analysis of the temperature data for Amberley, which is the data set that I'm going to talk about this afternoon, was informed by discussions with Gavin Schmidt from the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, but also from collaborations with Ken Stewart, a blogger who lives in Rockhampton in Queensland. At the very beginning of this year, David Jones, the manager of climate monitoring and predictions at the Australian Bureau of Meteorology, put out a media release explaining that last year, 2013, was the hottest year on record. And he followed up with radio interviews in which he said, and I quote, "We know every place across Australia is getting hotter, and very similarly, almost every place on this planet. So you know, we know it's getting hotter, and we know it will continue to get hotter. It's a reality and something we will be living with for the rest of this century." Clearly, Dr. Jones, who advises the government, doesn't take much notice of the satellite data that suggests there's been a 17-year-long pause in global warming. Indeed, he's more interested in the instrumental temperature record, but not so much with the observational data, more the homogenised data developed with algorithms. Now, according to various peer-reviewed papers, homogenisation is a technique that enables non-climatic factors to be eliminated from temperature records. And it can be important and it can be usefully applied. For example, in Australia, many records from stations where temperatures were recorded at post office were then moved to airports. And it may be necessary to apply some level of homogenisation to the data if you want a continuous record for that general area. But at a place called Amberley in Queensland, the temperature record has been recorded continuously since 1941 at a well-maintained site, and there's no need for any homogenisation. I'm using Amberley as a case study to illustrate the homogenisation trick that can change temperatures so that last year is always cooler than next year. Now, Amberley is Australia's largest Air Force base, located near the city of Brisbane and about halfway down Australia's east coast. The unhomogenised mean annual maximum temperature for Amberley, and it's up on the screen there, since recordings were first made in 1941, shows temperatures trending up from a low of about 25.5 degrees Celsius in 1950 to a peak of almost 28.5 in 2002. That's the maximum temperature. But the minimum temperature for Amberley shows cooling from about 1970. Of course, this cooling does not accord with anthropogenic global warming theory. So the Bureau of Meteorology has changed the minimum temperature data by jumping up the minimum temperatures twice through an homogenization process, once around 1980 and then around 1996, to achieve a combined temperature increase of over 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is a very large step change, remembering that the entire temperature increase associated with global warming over the 20th century is considered to be in the order of 0.8 degrees Celsius. Through the homogenization process, the Bureau has changed what was a cooling trend in the minimum temperature of around 1 degree per century into a warming trend of 2.5 degrees Celsius per century. This is the effect of those two step-ups. Now, NASA's no small change, but a change in the trend from cooling to warming. NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies also supplies a jump up to the Amberley series because it's incorporated into their series, which then informs the IPCC. And they've made other changes, so the annual average temperature for Amberley increases for the series that's then incorporated into the IPCC temperature record by about 2 degrees. Its new director, Gavin Schmidt, has been blunt about what has been done to the Amberley minimum temperature record in a discussion with me on Twitter. He explained to me, and I quote, "There is an inhomogeneity detected around 1980, and based on continuity with nearby stations, it has been corrected, not rocket science." When I sought clarification regarding what was meant by nearby stations, Gavin Schmidt provided me with a list of 310 localities used by climate scientists at Berkeley who have also homogenized the Amberley data and found a discontinuity in 1980. But these 310 nearby stations in inverted commas, they stretch to a radius of 605 miles and include Hamilton Island across the Coral Sea, and they go in the opposite direction over the Great Dividing Range and use the temperature record for Quilpie in Australia's outback. Now, considering the unhomogenised data for 6 truly nearby stations that are part of what is recognised as a high-quality network, the Bureau's jump up for Amberley creates an increase for the official trend of 0.7 degrees Celsius per century. And if you look at the closest nearby high-quality station, Brisbane Aero, this is a station that's part of what's called the Acorn-Sat network, it actually follows the Amberley trend. Indeed, perhaps the cooling at Amberley is real. Why not consider this in the absence of physical evidence to the contrary? In the Twitter conversation with Dr. Schmidt, I suggested it was nonsense to use temperature data from radically different climatic zones to change the observational data for Amberley. Dr. Schmidt replied, and I quote, "Your question is ill-posed. No one changed the trend directly. Instead, procedures corrected for a detected jump around 1980. Procedures corrected. Dr. Schmidt's referring, of course, to the mathematical algorithms that reach out to nearby locations that are across the Coral Sea and beyond the Great Dividing Range to change what was a mild cooling trend into dramatic warming for an otherwise perfectly politically incorrect temperature series. I don't have time in my presentation today to explain in detail the theoretical basis or mathematics that underpins the algorithms, but perhaps we can discuss this in question time. There are various excellent technical papers, including a paper in Agriculture and Forestry Meteorology, volume 49, and it shows how if you let these algorithms correct for discontinuities independently of any oversight, every time, for example, a hedgerow is cut down, there is potential for a discontinuity. And when you apply these algorithms to correct for this continuity, a warming trend can be either generated or exaggerated. In a book I highly recommend, Science and Public Policy, The Virtuous Corruption of Virtual Environmental Science, Professor Ainsley Kello from the University of Tasmania explains how reliance on computer models, as well as the infusion of values, has produced a preference for virtual over observational data. Now, governments around the world, including the new Abbott government and including George Christensen, who is here today, he is confronted with data from the people who are employed to advise the government, data that they use the instrumental record, and it's homogenised such that it can give the impression of catastrophic global warming. Until something is done about this issue of data homogenisation, we are stuck with a paradigm full of clever tricks. Thank you.
Former Australian PM Tony Abbott's office wanted to investigate the Bureau of Meteorology, BOM, amid claims it had exaggerated climate change forecasts, documents show. In 2014, climate skeptics accused the BOM of manipulating temperature data to accord with global warming predictions. There was no independent evidence to back the claims. Accurate temperature records play a key role in climate change modelling and forecasts. Documents released to the Australian Broadcasting Corp, ABC, via a Freedom of Information request, show that Mr. Abbott's Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet wanted to conduct due diligence on the Bureau as part of a broader task force that was providing advice on post-2020 carbon emissions reduction targets. The allegations of data manipulation were originally published by News Corp newspaper The Australian, in August 2014. Based on comments made by climate change skeptic and biologist Jennifer Marahusi. Bureau defended. In George Orwell's 1984, Winston Smith knows that he who controls the present controls the past. Certainly the Bureau appears intent on proving the historical temperature record by changing it, Ms. Marahusi said. The Australian reported the Bureau denied altering climate records to exaggerate estimates of global warming. Our role is to make meteorological measurements, and to curate, analyze and communicate the data for use in decision-making and to support public understanding, it said at the time. Environment Minister Greg Hunt defended the Bureau, arguing against an investigation. It is important to note that public trust in the Bureau's data and forecasts, particularly as they relate to bushfires and cyclones, is paramount, Mr. Hunt wrote to Mr. Abbott. After winning government in 2013, Mr. Abbott scrapped a number of initiatives introduced by previous governments to address rising levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The probe was eventually dropped. Scientists and climate change activists are hoping Australia's new Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who has previously called for tough action against climate change, will change the government's current policies.